Hadassah's Defining Zionism in the 21st Century, an online speaker series. I'm Marcy Natan, National President of Hadassah, the Women's Zionist Organization of America, and the proud convener of this monthly series. We invite all of you, those here with us at 40 Wall Street in our new offices, and those of you participating online from your local communities, to join us in creating a safe space as we explore Zionism from various perspectives. We certainly may not all agree on any one definition of Zionism, but we must agree to be respectful of one another and to frame our questions in the spirit of respecting each other's opinions. For those of you who are physically in the room with us, please turn off your cell phones. We've done that up here. And ask that you write your questions on the index cards that were provided. Please write legibly and in large print and raise your cards and they will be collected. For those of you viewing online, if you haven't already done so, please register with Livestream to enable you to type your questions into the chat box on the side of your screen so that you can be recorded and we can present your questions as well. During today's session, we may not be able to get to all of the questions that are asked, but we'll do our best to accommodate as many of you as possible. We're honored to have with us this afternoon Gil Hoffman, Chief Political Correspondent and Analyst for the Jerusalem Post. We are especially thrilled that as part of his travels from Israel to the United States, we are able to host him here today as our Defining Zionism presenter. Today's topic is, do Zionism and democracy go hand in hand? Additionally, we are honored to have with us for the first time on our Defining Zionism series, a professional moderator, Gary Rosenblatt, editor and publisher of the Jewish Week. So, gentlemen, the mic is yours.
Thanks very much, Marcy, and welcome everyone here and wherever you may be. Gil, I thought it might be appropriate to share a story about a famous Israeli philosopher who came to the U.S. and was interviewed his first day. And he was asked, in a word, how are things in Israel? And he said, good. And the interviewer said, in 2 words? He said, no good. So I think we're all aware of the complexities of life, American Jewish life, Israeli life as well, and much that we can talk about that's good and no good. But I thought we might start, since part of your bio says you're the most optimistic journalist in Israel. We might start with a little bit about what you actually do day to day in terms of your coverage of the scene in Israel.
Thank you so much, Gary. Thank you to Marcy, and thank you to Hadassah, and thank you to everyone who's watching this, both here in the room and across America, especially my mother, who's watching in Lincolnwood, Illinois. So I cover politics for the Jerusalem Post, and I host a daily radio show on voiceofisrael.com that both aim to tell people who care about Israel around the world what's going on behind the scenes in the country. So I follow around the Prime Minister and all the other politicians and report about what they are doing to stay in power, and a little bit about what they're doing to serve the people as well.
So, as many of us know, the Jerusalem Post sponsored a major conference here in New York yesterday. It was attended by more than 1,500 people, and you were there covering it. My understanding is that a number of the speakers, particularly Democrats, were heckled by the crowd, and there was an editorial in the Jerusalem Post today kind of defending David Liu. In terms of his being a friend of Israel, although he was heckled, and I wondered if we could sort of, in keeping with the subject about democracy and Zionism, I was at a major event here in New York last week, where some of the Republican candidates and potential candidates spoke to a very large Jewish crowd of about 1,000 people at a event sponsored by Rabbi Shmuley Boteach and his organization. And it, as I wrote, it did not seem to be that there was a Democrat in the room in terms of their response. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that kind of reaction that you're hearing from American Jewish audiences.
Sure. Look, I was there at the Jerusalem Post conference yesterday. We knew in advance that the crowd was going to be unruly. I myself emceed a panel at the Jerusalem Post conference 2 years ago in which Carolyn Glick, columnist for the Jerusalem Post, and Alan Dershowitz attacked each other back and forth. And I don't think Alan's coming back to Jerusalem Post conferences because, of course, there was a very right-wing audience that really took the side of Carolyn Glick, and this is what happens at these conferences. I think that the American administration knew well in advance what they were getting into by sending such a top official to this event. There are those at the conference who even said that they purposely sent him to get heckled, knowing that they would get that he would be heckled, that it would actually help them out politically in terms of their own efforts to advance the Iran nuclear deal, to paint American Jews as right-wing extremists, and as putting Israel before America. I can see how that might have helped the Obama administration's agenda, and perhaps if that would have been told to the crowd in advance, maybe they would have behaved differently. I don't know. But there are different points of view about these conferences that the Jerusalem Post puts on every year. I hear people say, oh, this is exporting the negativity and how intense Israeli democracy is, and we shouldn't be airing our dirty laundry abroad. And then I hear the opposite, which is we are showcasing Israeli democracy, which is thriving. And if there's anything American Jews can relate to about Israel, it's our democracy. If there's anything that helps our public diplomacy, and not just with American Jews, with Americans in general and with people in the West, it's to show that in Israel we've got differences of opinion. We're not afraid to air them out. We're a country that is still deciding its future, and it's very exciting to be a part of it. And so letting the American Jews feel like they're part of the show, I think, is important. And in the end, I think the positives outweigh the negatives.
You mentioned that it was expected that it would be a right-wing crowd, and I can tell you from my seat as the editor of the Jewish Week in New York for almost 22 years, the mail we get in terms of letters, emails, calls in response to, particularly to issues in Israel, are decidedly from the right, consistently, doesn't depend on who's in power. Why do you think that is? Why is it sort of a natural that you're going to get a right-wing reaction?
Maybe the Leftwing Fringe isn't reading. I don't know, but it's the fringes that make their voices heard louder than the mainstream, and that doesn't mean that they're the majority. The majority are mainstream people taking things in, making their decisions based on what they read. And, we at the Jerusalem Post, just like you at the New York Jewish Week, provide people with the information, then they can decide for themselves what their truth is. Right-wing people are people who care passionately about what they believe in and want their voice to be heard. And I can understand their frustration. Democrats have been in power now for 6 years in the presidency. That makes them quite upset, and they have a lot to be upset about. And so perhaps if Republicans would come to power, then maybe the left will be more upset and therefore writing you more letters. You never know.
Are you saying that people on the left are not as passionate about their views?
I did not say that.
Okay. Just want to make sure. A couple of weeks ago, the JPPI, the Jewish Policy Planning Institute, it's a major think tank based in Israel, had a conference here in New York with about 50 leading political figures and analysts, including Henry Kissinger, Martin Indyk, Dennis Ross, a number of key people. And one of the sessions, which had about 25 people were in the room, about half were Israelis, half were Americans, and the topic was on how we can support each other in terms of our views on that are critical in Jewish life. And the American group was very concerned about Israel today in terms of the new government, in terms of issues of religious pluralism, concerns about democracy in the new government. And the response from the Israelis was, Israelis don't care about women of the wall. They don't care about the chief rabbinate's policies. They have bigger issues to worry about. And this was a group of people who really know each other's country well, and yet there was this tremendous gap, misunderstanding or miscommunication. I wonder if you think that is common, or what your take is on this kind of gap.
The gap between American Jews and Israeli Jews is serious, and it's intensified over the last 6 years during the Obama administration, when differences have been highlighted on key issues. I don't think it's permanent. I do think that when there will be a Prime Minister of Israel and a President of the United States who get along better, then the people won't have such stark differences between them. I really do see it as a temporary phenomenon that's based on the personal hostility between the two leaders. And I interviewed Dennis Ross on my show on voiceofisrael.com, and he was quite critical of the Obama administration from the left, about steps that had been taken by him that have prevented the peace process from moving forward. And from what I understand from Israeli participants in the JPPI, that they shared those views. You hear it more and more in Israel that the left is upset with Obama, not the right, whereas in America it's the right that's upset with Obama, not the left. And so that itself is a difference that I think is fascinating.
Yeah, Michael Oren, the former Israeli ambassador to the U.S., whose tenure overlapped with the Obama administration, has a book coming out in about 2 weeks that catalogs his experiences as ambassador in Washington during the Obama administration, and I think it's going to cause quite a stir in our community, the American Jewish community, because he is an historian and is considered a pretty centrist person. And the examples he cites are quite specific, and I would categorize them as not any one incredibly dramatic problem with the Obama administration, but a cumulative series of sort of, not a stab in the back, but pinpricks in the back that added up to a lot of distrust and very bad feelings, not only from the top two leaders. I wondered your thoughts about when you say that it's sort of a temporary situation. Is this just about the personalities of Netanyahu and Obama, or how much, carries down in both governments?
Okay, Gary, before I get into the answer to this question, I think I did a disservice by leaving out before, in your previous question, Israelis need to do more to understand the American Jewish community. The American Jewish community has serious concerns about what's going on in Israel. And it's not just women of the wall. You've got much more mainstream kind of issues of ensuring that the reform and conservative movements are respected, ensuring that people feel comfortable praying at the Western Wall no matter where they are on the map religiously. And I know that when I interviewed Netanyahu during the campaign, I made a point, since the Jerusalem Post reaches out to its audience, its readership, who are by and large diaspora Jews, to ask these questions, received a commitment from him that despite the ultra-Orthodox joining the government, that the reform and conservative movements would still be protected. The funding for rabbis that just started happening in the previous Knesset would continue, and the egalitarian prayer space he committed on video to keep. And we'll hold him to that. Now, Michael, this really leads into the question you just asked. Michael Oren is the representative of American Jewry in the Knesset. He's very proud of being that, the same way that Dov Lipman was in the previous Knesset. It's great that after not having a member of Knesset that was born in the United States or any English-speaking country for 30 years, since you had to bring him up, didn't you? Then that we have these people who are wonderful public servants, representing not only the people of Israel and those who've made Aliyah from America who need a voice, but also taking into account the views of diaspora Jews. And so Michael will be there doing that, in addition to promoting his book. Now, I spoke to Michael a couple of weeks ago. He was very frustrated. 61 members of Knesset in the coalition, a narrow majority of one. No member of Knesset is allowed to go abroad, and so he can't really promote his book. Other than I think he'll be doing a book tour in America on Skype. So or he'll get in trouble for coming. He can bring down Netanyahu's government by coming. So Michael saw firsthand, far be it from me, as someone who's been close to Netanyahu's people over the years, can comment on seeing what they went through and say that there were problems that went back and forth, that were personality differences as well as very strong policy differences. From the very, very beginning, from the very first meeting between Netanyahu and Obama in the White House, where Netanyahu said, "Mr. President, if you succeed at preventing the nuclearization of Iran, the extremists in the region are defeated and their moderates are empowered. You can make peace in the Middle East." That's what Netanyahu said. And then Obama said, "No, I see it the other way. When I make peace between Israel and the Palestinians, that will bring the Arab and Muslim world on board to prevent the nuclearization of Iran." That major policy difference on both Iran, the Palestinians, and the sequence between them has never gone away.
So just to come back to the religious pluralism issue, and it's good to hear that the Prime Minister was on record in supporting, I guess, the accomplishments of the previous government. Is the best that liberal American Jews can hope for is that there's a status quo, or there's a lot of concern that things will be undone in this government, and I guess more generally. We are well aware this is a coalition, as you mentioned, very narrow one of 61. What kind of longevity is predicted for it? And given that it has the Haredi ultra-Orthodox parties, as well as certainly it looks rightward, what kind of legislation can we expect from this government?
Okay, so that's a couple of questions in one. First, I'll talk, I think I need to introduce it by giving a little bit of a political primer. Here we have our 120 members of Knesset smiling at you. These are the people who think they run our country. We can be very proud that there are more women than there's ever been in the Knesset. We're up to 29, soon to be 30. We have a lot of minorities represented here. The Arab Party is the third largest party now, and they have Bedouins and Christians and Muslims and Druze, and the Bedouin member of Knesset even has more than one wife. And we, of course, have an Ethiopian member of Knesset who is now the head of our Immigrant Absorption Committee, who we hope will take steps to help out that community that requires a lot of assistance. And so now, having said that, No one party has ever won a 61-vote majority out of 120 members of parliament. Because of that, they have to form coalitions to run the country together. Now, when you have a narrow coalition of 61 that any member of parliament can bring down at any given point, what that means is that it can accomplish only what there's a consensus on. So what is there a consensus on? Well, there's a consensus on bridging the gap between rich and poor and lowering the cost of living. That it can do, and that's important. It can focus on Israeli security, also important. It can make small changes in the electoral system, which is inherently messed up, not large ones. It can theoretically move the peace process forward because such things are handled discreetly. On matters of religion and state, that is the major fault line in this government, where you have secular people, you have modern Orthodox religious Zionist people who are very resentful of the ultra-Orthodox, even more so than the secular. And then you have the ultra-Orthodox who have been extremely weakened in this Knesset. The death of the great Rabbi Ovadia Yosef of the Sephardim and the split in that party resulted in Shas going down from 11 seats to 7. And the Ashkenazi ultra-Orthodox went down from 7 to 6, even though I believe their birth rate did go up. And so they are limited in what they can do, even though by nature they have more power than they did in the previous Knesset, where they were not part of the government, and now they are part of the government. And so they've made their demands that help the ultra-Orthodox, especially the ones who are poor. This doesn't necessarily affect diaspora Jews. Anything that they would want to any kind of major step that they would want to take that would affect diaspora Jews, they can't do because there's not enough of a consensus to bring it about. You also asked within the same question, Gary, and I didn't forget how long this government will last. Well, that also ties into the 61. So, on the one hand, any member of Knesset could just bring it down immediately, but it's not going to happen. No one wants to be the guy who forced us into another election. You know, Israelis we're sick and tired of elections, and not just political correspondents who work very hard during elections. Israelis in general say that they wouldn't mind having elections only every 4 years like you're blessed with in the United States, even though your elections last 3 years. So I don't know if you're exactly the model either. But sometimes coalitions of 61 are stronger than coalitions of 62, 3, 4, 5, because in those coalitions, then people can afford to flex their muscles, and here they can't. Everyone is counted on. And so historically, those governments have lasted longer than anyone expected them to, and they've generally been more cohesive as well. This coalition is cohesive on certain issues. Matters of religion and state is not one of them.
And as we're reminded by Israeli politicians, we American Jews don't have a vote, and so we are not exactly a prominent constituency. We're told, bring 1 million people like you to Israel, and then we'll talk. But let's talk a little bit about the state of the peace negotiations, which came to an end last year, and there's a sense that, and I welcome your comments on this, there's a sense that perhaps Prime Minister Netanyahu is looking for a way to, climb down from the tree in terms of his statements just before the election that have been interpreted, at least by President Obama, as not wanting to or not willing to have a two-state solution. And is there a way to break this impasse with a narrow right-wing government and an American president who seems like he's had it with the Israeli prime minister? Where do we go from here?
Okay, so I'm glad you phrased the question in a very sensitive way, because I'm on a 2-week speaking tour around America right now. And the amount of disinformation that there is in the American media that people have just accepted as fact really troubles me. People assume that Netanyahu came out in the last days of the campaign against the Palestinian state. Not true. He was wrongly interpreted by the New York Times as such through sloppy reporting. he was interviewed by NRG, which is a right-wing website owned by Sheldon Adelson, by an interviewer who wanted him to come out against a Palestinian state, and left the room disappointed that he had not succeeded. He spoke about the challenges going on in the region, about ISIS and Iran and Syria and all the death and destruction around us. And he said, the interviewer said, because of that, you don't see a Palestinian state being created in the next term with this situation. And Netanyahu said, indeed. That doesn't mean he's against a Palestinian state. He lamented that the current reality does not permit creating it. And so he did that within the context of what's going on in the region, because he was speaking in the limited way that he can. Perhaps if he'd been speaking in a more open kind of way, and he does limit himself less than other leaders do, and maybe not enough as he should, but he would say that it's the American administration that prevents the peace process moving forward, not the Israeli administration. Certainly, obviously, the Arabs and the Palestinians making their steps also has made it harder when you have the Palestinians leaving the negotiating table, making a deal with Hamas, and trying to put Israel on trial around the world. But right-wing governments in Israel have advanced peace processes. The last prime minister to withdraw in a peace deal from parts of the West Bank was named Netanyahu, and would again, in the right circumstances in the region, he says, and I would add, in America. If you look back historically, whenever Israel has withdrawn from anything, there's been one of three things. There's been either an American leader who Israelis revere, an Arab leader who Israelis trust, or a desire on the Israeli part to withdraw unilaterally. We don't have any one of those three things right now, Gary. After having thousands of rockets fired from Gaza, hundreds from southern Lebanon, we're not going to have a desire on the Israeli part to withdraw unilaterally anytime soon. With Abbas currently in his 11th year of a 4-year term, after he rejected the plan that Ehud Olmert offered him as prime minister of 100% of the West Bank with land swaps, taking in thousands of refugees, dividing Jerusalem, and having the old city internationalized under the control of 5 countries, 3 of them Arab, he's not going to be the Arab leader who Israelis trust, and there's not one on the horizon. And an American leader who Israelis revere, that is possible, Gary. That is possible in another 600 days. There's going to be a different president. It doesn't matter who she or he may be. That president can be a president who Israelis revere.
So how much of what you've just been describing is a problem of Israeli Hasbara? Because American Jews are very quick to describe the lack of PR, Hasbara, as a major contributing factor. So you have an American Jewish community, many of whom today would say that Israel is the party at fault for not advancing the peace talks. And as you've described just now, in your view, it's a very different picture that we're not seeing or not appreciating. So is that just sort of the fall guy is Hasbara, or is it about policy itself?
Perhaps too many people get their news from the New York Times, and not enough people get their news from the Jerusalem Post. Perhaps they would have a more accurate presentation of the what's going on if they did. But Israel has gotten better at public diplomacy. When I moved to Israel in 1999, and there was not an English language spokesman for the government appointed because the prime minister at the time, Ehud Barak, did not think it was important. Then gradually, Ra'anan Gisin did a great job, and Miri Eisen did a great job, and Mark Regev has been doing a great job, as well as the spokespeople for the army, Peter Lerner now. But we have a long way to go. We've gotten better in Israel at bypassing the media by getting messages out through social media. The IDF in particular, I think, has been very successful at that. But I at the Jerusalem Post can only do my part. I get interviewed a lot by Al Jazeera and CNN and other media outlets in telling people the truth. And the truth is, this Knesset could have been a lot more right-wing. After a war where rockets are fired at Tel Aviv and the airport is shut down by some geographically confused people in the FEA in Washington, you would expect people to move solidly to the right. And they didn't so much. You know, Eli Yishai's right-wing party was the only one that would not join any government, that would negotiate a Palestinian state. He didn't get the minimum number of votes needed to pass the threshold and get into the Knesset. The one party whose leader opposes a Palestinian state that got into the Knesset out of 10 went down from 12 seats to 8. Avigdor Lieberman decided not to join the government because it's not right-wing enough. And Netanyahu's Likud moved away from the right by rejecting Moshe Feiglin and bringing in ideologically undefined people and people who openly support a Palestinian state.
So here's a question I'd love to ask, because you cover the Prime Minister, you've interviewed the Prime Minister. What does Bibi want? And who knows besides perhaps Bibi?
Sarah. Look, people ask me who's the second most powerful person in Israel. Is it the defense minister, Sara Bitachon? Is it the foreign minister, Sara Chutz? Well, in this case, the same person. No, it's Sara Netanyahu. Every leader, I'm sure, speaks to their spouse all the time about their day. And so they have the prime minister's ear. The prime minister has had a lot of staff come and go. And so is there anyone super close to him? Ron Dermer's super close to him. He very much has his ear. Other than that, everyone else has come and gone over the last few years. And so what does Netanyahu want? It's no secret, Gary. Netanyahu wants to prevent the nuclearization of Iran. Okay, he has a messiah complex. He believes that he and only he can prevent the world from being destroyed, no less. And he really thought that if this election would result in somebody else being prime minister, no more Israel. He really thought that. Does he want to make peace in the Middle East? Were it possible, he would. The current situation, he does not believe, facilitates that. Would he withdraw from large swaths of land and create a Palestinian state with Jerusalem as its capital? The answer is yes. He would do it under the right circumstances. But I believe I've heard even American officials, I feel even the president hinting that that's not possible right now. And so even Obama and Netanyahu said basically the same thing and yet still managed to sound hostile to one another.
Let's talk a little bit about Iran. I think we're all aware of the seriousness of the situation and of the clock that's ticking down toward June 30th. And there seems to be a clear sense that President Obama really wants this deal to happen. He's ignored many of Iran's efforts to make more problems in the world and in the Middle East in terms of Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran is still the terrorist capital of the world. And yet this deal doesn't deal with any of those things other than the nuclear piece. And so some say in Washington that this would be a time for Netanyahu to cut a deal in recognizing that the president is going to get this agreement done. And if Netanyahu says either directly or indirectly that he's okay with that Israel can get all kinds of military, financial perks. But the window is closing. He only has until the end of June. Others say that Netanyahu is not going to do that. He's going to double down on the bet that he kind of lost so far, and has figured that he's never going to have a relationship with Obama that's going to be a positive one. So he's looking to 2017, and sounds like you think the latter is what's going to happen.
I think you've explained what Netanyahu will do very well. Netanyahu's burning bridges. I mean, there's no way coming back with the current president. Their points of view on the Iran deal are diametrically opposed. And as an Israeli, hearing Jack Lew, the treasurer, yesterday speak about the positives of this deal, I hope and pray that he is right and that the 85% of Israelis who oppose this deal and the 70% of Americans who oppose this deal are wrong. Because I want to survive. But it was nice to hear a defense of it, and it's up to America to hold Iran to that. But we in Israel are subject to Netanyahu saying over and over again, as well as his political opponents, how bad the deal is. Now, I know by heart all 12 reasons why this deal is so horrible. And I'm not going to bore the people who know them probably also by heart. And so Netanyahu knows that despite his speech in Congress, what passed in Congress does not have enough teeth to stop the deal. Netanyahu is politically savvy in American politics. And so June will come, and then July. If a deal is reached in June, then Congress will put on a show in July, make it look like they can flex their muscles and stop it or make it better or whatever. They can't. There's no 2/3 veto to override what the president wants to do. And so, after that, there's a review process that the Congress is going to continue to be involved in regularly. And then perhaps when there's another president who it's not their baby, can undo some damage. Again, doesn't matter who she or he may be. Who can stop the Iranian nuclear deal right now? One man.
Supreme leader.
Correct. The Ayatollah, and I do not put my faith in him.
Well, I don't know if we put our faith in him, but that is a scenario that has possibilities. We have some questions that have come either from here or from elsewhere. So I'm going to come back to the Iran piece if we have time, but I do want to honor these. So this questioner says, does two bus systems extend Zionism and democracy, or is that apartheid? It was not a military objective, but a settler request. And the question is referring to, well, you can explain the issue about having Arabs on separate buses and what that status is.
Look, I've got news for people. Arabs and Jews don't live together in the West Bank. They go to different places. And so practically speaking, it actually makes sense. It's not a racist statement for them to want to go to different places. But Israel knows it's under a microscope, and even a step that would be practical would be criticized as racist, and that's a legitimate point of view. It certainly looks racist, even if it's practical. And so I can understand that when you have a situation where Palestinians who they receive work permits to come into Israel, those work permits have been taken advantage of to commit terrorist attacks in Israel. We've had all kinds of automotive terror and stabbings, unfortunately, that were committed by such people. And so this was a step by the Defense Ministry to have better monitoring of the people. That backfired. They didn't take into account enough how bad it would look around the world. So yes, the settlers wanted it because the settlers don't want to die. And a lot of people in Israel wanted it because they don't want to die. Is that racist? A little bit, maybe. But it's also part of life. And so people want security steps to be taken that are even extreme when you're living in such a situation day in and day out.
So one of the major themes and issues in American Jewish life today is we disagree about a lot of things, but one of the things I think various elements of the American Jewish community worry about is the next generation and whether their allegiance or feelings toward Israel will continue as their parents or grandparents have. And of course, on the one side, you have the success of Birthright Israel, which has brought hundreds of thousands of young people from around the world, not just America, between the ages of 18 and 26 to Israel. And the studies have shown that that's had a lasting and positive impact. On the other hand, you have various studies. You know, the Pew study. Pew used to be thought of as a Yiddish word. Now we think of it differently. And much of what it portrays about our American Jewish community is very worrisome, with strong growth on the right of the Orthodox community, a growing group of nuns, Nones. Their habit, I guess, is non-practice. They're not affiliated with synagogues, organizations. They're not interested in any kind of organized Jewish life. And that has tripled in about 10 years from 7% to 21%. And that seems consistent with other religions in America as well, a move away from religion. And the middle, which I guess would be largely the conservative reform movements, is aging and having fewer children. So with that, the studies also show that for younger people, there's just less affinity in their kishkes with Israel. And part of that might be because about half of them, of millennials, have one non-Jewish parent. So many say that Israel should recognize American Jewry as a strategic asset of what American Jews can do as a community politically and in other ways. And you talk about sort of acknowledging certain racist policies. I mean, that doesn't play well here. How do you square the circle? How do you deal with the trends that you see?
Wow, I'm glad I'm not the leader of Hadassah or a major American Jewish federation who has to come up with the solution to that huge problem that you just outlined, Gary. Obviously, a lot of people are being paid a lot of money to work on all these issues, and many of them are having a lot of success. I mean, Hadassah, I can say I live next door to Young Judea, and they sure look like they're having fun. And I've spoken to hundreds and hundreds of birthright groups, and some of them, the most interesting groups, Gary, are the ones that are not in college. The older groups, especially the ones who come from California and other places that have reputations for being more moderate or whatever in their views. Sometimes they ask questions for more than 2 hours, and I'm not going to go until the last question gets answered, because it's so important. And I've seen how the people come back from the birthright trips and the birthright follow-up trips like Hasbara that are so successful. I see how this has an impact changing their life. And I've seen the talks that I do in America, who they get organized by, and it's very often been the people who before going on birthright didn't have anything. I've seen how a generation that there was in between the people who remembered the 6-Day War and when birthright began, say people who are now between 37 and 57, are lost. Those are people that should have been in a leadership role right now and have gotten passed over all around America by the birthright generation, going straight from the 6-Day War generation to the birthright generation in American Jewish leadership. That gives me optimism for the future. Now, the Reform and Conservative movements, I speak at Reform and Conservative synagogues that are doing great outreach to their young people. There are wonderful models out there who we can all learn a lot from. They need to be doing more to keep their people, their young people, committed after they finish their bar bat mitzvah training, make the Hebrew school less annoying and more inspiring.
Last year, there was a major initiative talked about, I think, through Naftali Bennett's ministry in terms of significant funding for American Jewish outreach, in terms of, again, I think recognizing the importance of the American Jewish community, not only in terms of dollars or lobbying in Washington, but just staying supportive of Israel and being that next generation. I imagine that stopped when the government dissolved, because we haven't heard much about it but since then, but please.
We don't have a lot of continuity in Israeli politics. So, when you have one minister come and go, then it's hard to get things done. I'm very thankful that we've had the same transportation minister for the last 6 years. And because of that, a lot of roads and trains are being built. We finally have continuity on a crucial topic for those of us who commute. One of the ministries that there is continuity from the previous government to the new one is the Diaspora Affairs Ministry, where Naftali Bennett is going to be continuing. And he has his initiatives that he's worked on together with leading American Jewish organizations in order to have the Israeli government more involved in reaching out to American Jews. And so there's a lot of funding behind it. There's a lot of thinking behind it. And I hope and pray that it succeeds.
Well, there are a lot of secret Israeli policies that get more attention in the media than that one, which apparently is still going on. So I look forward to hearing more about it. One of the questions submitted here is there anything that can be done to bring the Palestinians to the negotiating table? And I guess I would add to it, is there internal impetus in the government, or is it being imposed on them from the U.S. and other nations?
There can be pressure on the Palestinians to come back to the negotiating table. It's the international community that has failed the Palestinian people time and time again by letting their leadership harm them. Had the international community condemned Abbas for leaving the negotiating table and making a deal with Hamas, then perhaps they would have been forced to come back to the table. Had the American administration done more to persuade the Palestinians that they have to stay at the table and not try to seek some kind of internationally imposed solution that has no chance of happening, perhaps the Palestinians would have better lives right now. I think that the leaders of the international community who profess to care so much about the Palestinian people have done them a great disservice. Who has helped them? Israel has helped them. Netanyahu, when he took over, the first thing that he did in 2009 was remove 2/3 of the security checkpoints in the West Bank and take steps to improve their economy. Their economy in the West Bank doesn't make a lot of news, but it is doing very well. And that's why when you had an Arab Spring, it didn't happen in the West Bank. And right now, the security cooperation between Israel and the Palestinian Authority, the Israeli security officials say quietly that it's better than it's ever been. We don't want to open our mouth to the devil, we say in Hebrew.
Here's a question, I guess, relating to yesterday's conference. It says there was a great deal of discussion about renewed anti-Semitism and individuals making aliyah. What do you see as the consequences for Israel? And I guess I would ask as well, in terms of France in particular, where the aliyah was very strong for, I was going to say regrettable reasons, but obviously aliyah is very important to Israel. Do you think we are reaching a time when communities will come to Israel not out of desperation or because they're feeling forced away, but are being positively attracted to Israel? And what is Israel doing to make that more appealing?
Gary, that's a great question. And yesterday, Natan Sharansky at the Jerusalem Post conference said 2014 was the first year when there was more Aliyah by choice than Aliyah under duress. Then again, from what I understand from his numbers, he considers Aliyah from France by choice, and passionately argues why. That the people of France are just making a decision to have a better life in Israel, where there won't be as much assimilation and where you can have a better quality of life as a Jew. And so we are welcoming the French with open arms. Natan said that the 10,000 of them are going to be coming this year. Apparently they're all going to live in my neighborhood because their property values have gone up so much, and we hear so much French in the park. I can tell you in the class of my children, I'm French, is becoming heard more and more, almost as much as English. And they go to school where there's a lot of English among the children. We still hear a little Hebrew. In the end, they all come together and speak Hebrew together, which is a beautiful thing. And so, yes, there was a panel on anti-Semitism where Erwin Cutler talked about how anti-Semitism didn't die in Auschwitz, and this new anti-Semitism, the demonizing Israel, is so dangerous. It was quite frightening listening to what's going on in Paris and Copenhagen, in Argentina, in Turkey. I wouldn't want to raise my children under such a situation, and I'm very happy raising my children in a Jewish state. And even American Jews, look, we saw people open fire in Kansas City and in Seattle, and you're not safe anywhere.
That sounds like a very Jewish, positive statement. We're not safe anywhere. We all know the Jewish telegram, which is start worrying, details to follow. Those of us who remember telegrams, anyway. I think to go back to Iran for a moment. What can or is being done between now and the deadline of the end of June from Israel in trying to, stop this agreement from coming down as it is?
Well, it's a good thing Netanyahu appointed five ministers that have responsibility for Iran, because they've all been going around and talking. Yuval Steinitz claims that he has made the deal less bad. He claims credit for himself. And again, I hope and pray that he's telling the truth. And only he knows it. He's the one who's been speaking to Wendy Sherman on the American side, has been speaking to the French and the Germans and the British in order to try to make the deal less bad. No one is under the illusion that they can stop the deal. Actually, Carolyn yesterday at the conference believes that it can be stopped. But other than Carolyn, I think that no one is under the illusion that the deal can be stopped. And so they're trying to make the deal less bad. We just hope that the Americans would negotiate better. I mean, we saw the Americans come into the negotiations saying that the sunset clause will last 30 years. Instead, it lasts 10 to 15, which was what the Iranians were asking for. We want it to be 30 years when Chelsea will be the president of the United States.
Okay. Just one thought about anti-Semitism in America, which, as you say, no one knows, and there's always reason for being cautious and protecting ourselves. It struck me that one of the indications that anti-Semitism is not a serious problem today in most of America is looking at Sheldon Adelson as I sort of the ADL's nightmare in terms of a very well-known Jewish billionaire from Las Vegas who is very outspoken in trying to influence American and Israeli policy. And as far as I know, although he's criticized for any number of things, I don't think the anti-Semitic factor is a big one. So I think it's worth noting anyway. Let me just ask you for, it's always a pleasure talking with you. I wondered if you had any suggestions for the American Jewish audience here in terms of people say, how can I help Israel? What can I do other than reading the Jerusalem Post?
And watching and listening to voiceofisrael.com. Thank you so much for asking that question. And so those of you in the room and those of you who are watching, absolutely, you are a part of Israel's future. You do have a say. You don't have a vote, but you do have a say. And you are not taken into account as much as you should, but you are. And so when people ask me, what can I do to help? I tell people that helping Israel is easy, EASY, which stands for education, advocacy, solidarity, and your money. And so I know Hadassah is involved in all of those things. You can be very proud of yourselves in what you do. And so I don't talk about the why, but education, be as informed as you can. I mean, it happens to be that the media outlets I work for are the best, but there are others as well, I'm sure. And the more informed you are, the better it is for Israel, because you are ambassadors for the people of Israel, whether you like it or not. You know, especially in the age of Facebook and Twitter, where everyone is a journalist. I'm Gil_Hoffman on Twitter, by the way, and I'm almost at 9,000 followers. And if any of you are on Twitter, I need to get to that number soon. So, Gil_Hoffman. So, you can all, in your social circles, be they real social circles or what passes as social circles on computers nowadays, advance the truth about Israel. And so the more informed you are, every little bit helps. As for advocacy, be involved in all the pro-Israel movements that are helping us day in and day out, wherever you are on the political map. We need all the help that we could get. And S is for solidarity, which you've shown by coming here on your lunch break. And those of you who are watching on their lunch break or in California on their breakfast break, to find out what's really happening behind the scenes in Israeli politics. So thank you so much to Hadassah for organizing this and making this happen. And I come on speaking tours a couple times a year. I can be reached at gil@jpost.com or gil@voiceofisrael.com. Thank you.
So let me thank you, Gil. It's been a pleasure schmoozing with you and hearing your insights. I really appreciate it. It's very helpful, I think, for all of us. And to close, I want to turn the mic back over to a very patient Marcy. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
My thanks to both of you, a very patient and better informed Marcy, thanks to this conversation. I do want, before closing, to say to our audience, both here and listening to us and watching us from across the country, that one of the very practical ways that we can make a difference is to encourage our children and grandchildren to participate in those birthright trips. It's an amazing free opportunity, and my understanding from a recent meeting with Young Judea is that not only those trips sponsored by Young Judea, but others as well are decreasing in the number of participants. So I see that as one way we can really make a very practical difference and advocate on behalf of Israel. I want to remind everyone that this session, as well as our past sessions, has been recorded, and you can watch alone or in a group or as the centerpiece of a unit in one of your chapters or groups, or created as part of a community program. Also, please do share your feedback with us by completing our online survey, which will be emailed to you. Your input helps us to make each of these programs that much more interesting and meaningful for you. Continue this conversation on our website at www.hadassah.org/defining Zionism. That's www.hadassah.org/defining Zionism, and on Twitter using the hashtag Defining Zionism. Additionally, if you haven't done so already, please register for the entire Defining Zionism series to receive updates about our future programs. They're held monthly. Whether we agree on any one definition of Zionism or not, we can agree that the word conjures up in people a wide variety of emotions and responses. Gil, we appreciate your taking the time to be with us to address such a timely and sensitive subject in such a straightforward manner. We really do appreciate it. Again, the topic for today was, do Zionism and democracy go hand in hand? It's a resounding yes. Gary, you're a moderator extraordinaire. We really did appreciate having you with us. It added immeasurably to the afternoon. A special thank you to the volunteers and staff who have been involved in defining Zionism, without whom these presentations wouldn't be possible. And of course, our thanks to you, our audience here and across the country. You are really the key to the success of the program and the voices that make a difference in assuring that Israel remains a priority for each and every one of us. So thank you, and everyone have a wonderful rest of the day.